We're now going to have a wider panel discussion. I'm joined by Mark Purdy, who's Managing Director and Chief Economist at Accenture Research, by Birgitte Andersen, who's CEO of Big Innovation Centre, Paul Clarke, CTO of Ocado. Thank you very much for joining us, Paul. And of course, the Professor is joining us. So, Professor, I'm going to start with you. Sorry, don't get a break. The takeaways from your research is that, well, two things. That the discussion of China being about to overtake the US in terms of AI is probably exaggerated. Right. And the gap between the two is of a much greater magnitude than many commentators think. Am I misreading it, or is that your take? Is that the takeaway? Are they the takeaways?
Yeah, if we are forced to summarize in one sentence, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
But if we want to elaborate a little bit, then that is the reason why we are not trying to give a number.
Yeah.
We give a matrix because things are complicated.
Right.
So a better way of presenting the reality is to look at the matrix. So in some areas, China is indeed doing more than in the United States. But if we are looking at basic research, if we look at major impacts, then definitely the gap is still there. There's no clear sign of convergence.
Okay. That said, Mark, what sort of a driver is AI going to be for the Chinese economy? You've done a lot of work, a lot of research on this.
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much to Professor Cheung. I mean, a fascinating presentation. I mean, I guess my starting point is that you can kind of think of AI in two ways. So one is whether a country can be a leader in the production of AI, in doing the kind of the basic research, being a centre for the technology. And I think the conclusion from Professor Cheung's research is that China is actually doing pretty well, but probably not leading in some of the more kind of fundamental indicators. But the other way of thinking about AI is that it can be a tremendous growth driver for economies, even if they're not actually leading in the creation of AI. Because to a certain extent, the technology is out there, a lot of it is open source. So, assuming that continues to be the case, pretty much any country can use AI, use those technologies to drive growth. But a lot of that comes down to the kind of the economic and social conditions that you have in that country to really drive AI. And I think, again, that's somewhere, I think China is making some good progress. We know consumers have a high propensity to adopt the technology. But I think there are some concerns as well, and I think one of the concerns for China is that if you look at its workforce, a lot of the workforce is still very much in manual occupations. I think it's something like 45%. I can't remember the exact number. And and I think that poses a bit of a challenge because we have to think about how does China create a workforce that's really going to be able to harness AI. And I'm not just talking about AI firms, I'm talking about the broader economy. So to me, we have to think about AI in these sort of two different ways.
Because let me come to you in terms of the technology first, because I think there are two camps here. There's the development of the technology, and there's the application of the technology. Where do you rate China vis-a-vis the US and also the UK?
Well, I think something that's really important here, this is actually what we do with the technology. So when we're looking at AI as a growth driver, are we actually able to create better livelihood, better lives? And China, I would say that is doing a lot better than the US. In China, you have kind of developed more than 500 million people out of the economy into the economy as a major growth driver along the East Coast. I've been to all the 6 districts there several times. See, the transformation over the years is amazing in the United States and also to some extent Europe. We have a great financial crisis and we have basically been driving much more kind of income diversity. What I think is important here when we look at growth drivers and to understand also what's what in your results, I think your results just reflect very much the different strategies by the different countries So we take the United States. That strategy has been about Silicon Valley and Boston, the growth hubs, around the relationship with the universities, the elite universities, Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley, etc. And if you then go to India, we haven't talked about here, their strategy has been about develop supplier networks. And first later, the universities really got to fly, but the supplier networks in the United States. And we can go on. If you take like China, the strategy there was livelihood. Every place you go in China, you see on the map, the region, about how it's changed over time, better lives. And we can go on to different regions. We can take Russia, Kazakhstan, the whole Central Asia. This is GovTech. I was in Kazakhstan here in February. They're investing billions and billions and billions of the whole Central Asia, including Russia, into government technology. And the Middle East is talking about new governance, and they're building a new city called Neo in the middle of the desert of Saudi Arabia, bigger than Dubai. And UAE takes a China approach. They talk about happiness, creating better lives. So I think your data there really much reflects the different strategies. And from a UK perspective, I really think that what we are trying to do it all. And we have now found in the Big Innovation Center actually mapping out the whole innovation ecosystem, how we are coming up very close, number 3, by 2022. And this is because we have invested in everything in fund investment into AI, in companies, accelerators, incubators, in applications, in livelihood, so the whole thing around it, and of course in governance. And I think that's very important. So China's biggest problem, as I see, it will be by being not leading or falling off, would be governance and data ethics, and whether we can get some kind of global governance of the internet.
We'll get onto that later. Before I want to turn to you now, you're actually in business, running a business that's leveraging AI. How is that changing your business model, and how are you using it?
Well, obviously I don't actually run the business. I think I better correct that one. I run the technology side. But it's completely core to everything we do. So I often say, we view AI as the one to rule them all of the disruptive technologies, but it is very, very closely allied with our use of robotics. I think it's very dangerous if we separate those two, because I do think the most exciting things lie at that intersection of those technologies. So that's where we live, building smart machines. And I was struck by what you said about we have to be careful about comparing some of the metrics, as in knowing what is happening off grid, yes. And is we could be seduced into thinking we're seeing the whole territory just based on the kind of the digital map of those metrics. But the other thing is, I think the very non-linear nature of AI means that it's very hard to predict or extrapolate from the past in terms of the future. And so I think we should be slightly careful about that extrapolation, because history may not be a good indicator of where we go from here.
Could you just elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the explanations I've heard is that the big technical breakthroughs in AI have happened, and the next technical breakthrough might be another decade away. It's the application and how one uses it, which is tied up with the data. So you're saying that the future is really uncharted here, and looking back, it's not going to help guide us.
I think it's just that I think we're really, we're not very good at crystal ball gazing generally, as a species. We're certainly not good at estimating as a species. It's an exciting application of machine learning is in that whole area of how to do better estimating. But I think it's particularly dangerous with AI because, you can use one generation of machine learning to help train the next. You can, it's a different kind of intelligence. It's going to evolve much faster than human intelligence. The second order, third order, fourth order effects are going to be incredibly hard to map out. And therefore, I just think we have to be slightly consciously incompetent when it comes to trying to forecast, which is why I think the only thing we can do is prepare for it and make the most of it and put ourselves in the best possible position to exploit it, rather than thinking that we can somehow control all the outcomes of it.
Yeah. Well, Mark, you've done some forecasting. So how tricky is that? I think 1.6% GDP of China is one of the estimates that you
So I wouldn't actually describe it as a forecast because, you know, as Paul says, the development of AI is dependent on so many different conditions. But what we did do was look at the potential impact of AI on different economies under certain assumptions in the future around technology adoption. And we found that, for China, it could add about 1.6 percentage points to its GDP growth by 2035, which is obviously some way into the future. But I think sort of the key point around those projections is that so much depends on the complementary conditions that you have in place in the economy. So what's the investment? What's the institutional framework? What are the rules around data? What kind of innovation framework have you got in that economy to really diffuse that new technology across the economy? And that's where I think it's still all to play for. That I think most economies can get a significant growth boost from AI, but you've got to put the right conditions in place. And so to me, it's a little bit less about the technology and much more about how you create a very kind of competitive economy to be innovative and take advantage of the opportunities.
But does that suggest that China will have an edge because the state is so invested politically now, as you pointed out, talked about at Politburo meetings and all that, in driving AI, and therefore can make policy changes much more rapidly than, say, in the US or the UK? And I'll get your view on this in just a moment.
Right. Actually, if we look at the industrial revolutions in the past, there is a very interesting regularities there. It started from the UK, that's the first one, and the second one, the UK and the US, and the third one, the US and the UK. Right? There are similarities, there are regularities.
Yes.
So as an economist, so my interest is to understand why we see that regularities. Right? So it's because the technological change together with economic growth, because growth is driven by the technological change. These actually depend deeply on the institutions. So what kind of institutions are going to be beneficial to the technological change, particularly applications of the technologies to the economy, and then you end up with a higher growth rate. So all of these past experiences actually tell us the driving force is the market. It's not a planner, because no one knows what is going to happen next. So there's no way to plan for. So no matter how ambitious the plan is, no matter how much money you put there, at the end of the day, it's the distribution of the resources to the individuals, and it's the motivation of the individuals, the incentives of the individuals ultimately decide where the direction is. So take AI as a concrete example. What is going to happen next, we don't know, we really don't know. But one possible direction is related to the Internet of Things, the IoT. The IoT is going to create huge amount of data that no human being will be able to deal with. So without AI, the IoT data is just rubbish. Right? So you have to have AI there. So you have to have the connectivity. So therefore, all the infrastructures about the connectivity of IoT is the precondition. And also the incentives, the motivations of the managers, of the engineers, the customers, is going to decide if the IoT is going to develop or not. And then you have to have a proper AI algorithm, particularly designed for that particular type of applications. But what are these proper algorithms? Who knows?
Yeah.
Right? So no planner can tell anyone what algorithm you want to develop. So it is up to individuals to invent something. That's why the high quality universities are the key. And so then you just look at what are the high quality universities. So here, let me just give one example. This example is a recent paper co-authored by the DeepMind group together with UCL professors. This paper is a completely new way of machine learning. And this machine is not going to depend on the data that you give to the machine. Instead, the machine has a sensor, means IoT. Right? So the machine, the sensor put into the machine is going to search. And then the AI is going to calculate based upon the data collected by the sensor. The machine is a mouse. It's a robot. And it's going to search for the maze. And so this AI, this completely new type of AI. So this new type of AI very quickly solved this problem.
All right, so breakthroughs.
So this is the next generation of IoT.
Yeah. A lot of it's about ecosystems, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because what I want to say, of course, we can be very impressed by these amazing technologies being developed every single day. And the technology is clearly way much ahead on the way we live our lives and the opportunities which we have. And where I think that the planning might be more important than what you emphasize is literally that one of the big successes behind China has actually been that they planned, and it has also been, and currently right now, the whole physical and digital infrastructure investment is phenomenal. Plus, you having the government as not just an investor, but public procurer. So what we here in the UK, just to go to the homeland here, what we are talking about here is we have almost a problem talking about digital and physical infrastructure investment because who's paying, the public, the private, the users, so already this. Let me talk about public procurement into these systems. Again here, is there any strategy behind public procurement into our own technologies? So that's another question to be asked. So we have all these aspects on what is the role of government. And so one of the things which they did in the ecosystems in terms of when I was talking about Central Asia, so going to east of Mongolia, no, east of Siberia before Mongolia, minus 21 degrees. I thought, God, that must be horrible. It was fantastic because they had a huge investment. 80% of the economy was digital, and the whole Central Asia invested into GovTech, and they're putting billions into it. So is China. And in the UK, we invest very little. So in our analysis of where the money investment goes, we invest very little into GovTech, but a lot into marketing and advertisement and HR. That's where our AI go. So the ecosystem comes simply into that we need to bring all the aspects together, and that means plans. You don't come up with a blockchain because someone is sitting on the side and say, I have the best technology for the blockchain. That's not what stops it. What stops it is the planning around the supply chain and the industry. So I think we need in the West start to think a little bit more into, what kind of world we want to live in, and then plan a little bit. Otherwise, it will only be taken off by these tech giants you mentioned, and they're bigger than countries. Amazon is bigger than Kuwait, and Kuwait is doing oil, Amazon is not. Starbucks is bigger than Trinidad and Tobago. Walmart would be number 24 country in the world if it was a country, and all these tech giants are around between country number 6 and 100 in terms of sizes. So I think we need planning, and particularly around the data infrastructure as well.
Okay, Paul, I want to bring you in here too. I mean, obviously, lots of debate. Is it going to be market-driven? Do you see the AI development in your industry as driven clearly by the consumers and the competition? Or is there a policy shift that's required to go to the next step?
Can I answer a slightly different exam question?
Sure.
I want to come back on what you were saying there, because I was struck by, I completely agree with you about IoT, but I think it's a part of a bigger thing, which is very important, which is there's a lot of focus often on, how can AI replicate, what we do, when will AI, achieve a level of intelligence like humans. I think it's completely the wrong question. I think it's a different kind of intelligence. But more to the point, I think the really exciting things are where AI and machine learning can let us do things that humans can't do, and or even more than just don't want to do, actually can't do. And there are quite a number of examples of that in our business where the amount of data we're having to look at in real time is completely beyond human scale. Thousands of robots producing gigabytes of data a day, it's completely beyond what humans can control, let alone in real time. So I think that's very exciting. But I think the other thing is the technologies are interesting, but I think the competencies are way more interesting. And what's interesting about competencies is they're much more future-proof, they take time to acquire, but they are so much more useful, because once you've acquired them in one place, you can use them all over the place. Once you've got mastery of image recognition, you can use it in lots of places. Once you've got mastery of, using machine learning to control things that move, you can use it in lots of places. And therefore, that people side of how we grow those competencies is really important. And that then brings us on, for me, to the most important question, which comes back to your thing about planning, is education. And what do we need to do to our education system to put us in the best position to be able to capitalize on these kind of technologies, because otherwise it is going to be game over, because it requires a fundamentally different education system than one we have now.
I'd like to explore that more. Very happy to bring the audience in at this point. If you have a question, please put your hand in the air. Feel free to ask any or all of the panelists any questions. We'll bring around a mic, and all I ask is that you give us your name and your organisation. But first, I do want to go to you, Mark. One thing that Paul touched on there, and I think we touched on it when we were talking last week, is that there are a lot of fears about AI just replacing jobs and people. But correct me if I'm wrong, you see it as humans and AI working together to, there's potential for AI to make roles that humans can do more interesting, more challenging, and actually just build a better future.
Yeah, I mean, our view is that in the future, in an AI world, we're going to have a spectrum of different types of roles, different types of jobs. At one end of the spectrum, I think there will be some roles that are done almost entirely by machines. I can see that in transport, maybe a lot of kind of analytical data processing work. At the other end of the spectrum, we'll still have a lot of jobs that will be done by humans, because they require dexterity or creativity or empathy or whatever. And I think then you've got the fast swathe of jobs in between, where we'll see some combination of humans and machines working together. And and I think that will be a big driver of human productivity and performance. I mean, one of the examples I like to give is when doctors look at MRI scans, typically they might have an 80% success rate of detecting a particular form of cancer, for example. The algorithm might have an 85% success rate, but if you put the two together, it goes up to whatever, 99%. So I think we're going to see lots of examples like that. The work will become more rewarding, but people will also be more productive. And I come back to what Paul says, because I think the challenge now that we've got is that we really have to ensure that the educational system is going to give people the skills to operate effectively in that world. And also think about the current cohort of workers who may not have those skills, and how we equip them to deal with this world as well.
There are policies going to be required to train and retrain and do so with scale going
Can
forward.
Can I mention one number on education? So I'm expert advisor for the digital economy strategy of the Middle East, and the issue there is that the children entering school today, 65% of them is going to work in a profession that doesn't exist. And that means that the education is not about training people for a job. That's about giving lifelong learning skills.
Of course, yeah. No, we'll get into that. Please, so you had a question. Just let's name an organisation, please.
Tim Gordon, Practice AI. Thank you for a very fascinating presentation. A lot to chew on there. I observed in your slide about the number of active AI startups in China. It's a significant drop in the most recent year numbers. Is that a factor that just how the data is being brought together, or is it some sign that maybe it's an air out of what would be short-term?
Should I respond?
Yeah, please. Yeah. I'd like some views on this. Yeah.
Actually, we are also puzzled by this the data. But indeed, if you read the report by Tencent, so it's independent from our research, they actually described the situation which is fully consistent with our data. So the situation they described by words is the lack of ideas. So there are more money than ideas. So then they said the startups now is suffering from inflation. So the more and more become expensive from the point of view of VCs because the lack of ideas. And the reason the lack of ideas is because of the quality of higher education and the research. So that quality is not good enough to produce sufficient number of ideas.
Interesting. Yeah, please, because then we'll ask you.
It could also be so. In 2016, I was on one of these innovation trips around the whole East Coast in many districts, and the local government there said that they have been blamed by the Chinese government that they were investing in too many unproductive companies. They simply just put in a lot of money everywhere, and they needed to do more to focus on picking winners or picking some companies they believe that would really, really grow. So it could also be that the previous number has been a reflection on just money was thrown at anything, and now they become much more strategic in throwing it at a few companies and then building them.
Yeah, Paul, thoughts on this?
Well,
is it lack of ideas, do you think?
I think it's back to this competency, but I think that entrepreneurial capability is hugely important. It's a bit like having a fast car and no idea where you want to drive it. You know, I mean, it's not a good, let alone your ability to read the maps. But I mean, that's not a good thing. And I think if we think that's dramatic now, just wait till quantum computing finally comes through. Because then the challenge is going to be even more so, what the hell do we want to ask in terms of the questions, not how do we get the answers. So it's got that need for knowing where you want to go and being able to drive there in a creative way, is going to be even more important. And you put that together with AI, we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
So Ben Morley from Innovate UK. So thank you to all for your insights this morning. Firstly, a question for Professor Xu. You said that a lot of Chinese firms are now using US platforms to actually run their applications. You actually specifically mentioned Google and Facebook. So I guess the first part of my question is, how are they actually doing this, given the restrictions, the firewall that's in place? What is the business model they're employing to actually use those platforms? Are they actually basing themselves outside of China, or are they using those platforms inside of China? And I guess the second question is a follow-up to that, is for the rest of the panel. So given the considerations around kind of the Great Firewall and some of the restrictions on data and actually running applications from overseas servers and things of that nature, what are the challenges facing businesses, international businesses wanting to enter the Chinese market using AI, and how might those businesses overcome those challenges?
Okay, let's start with you on the Facebook group.
Right. So the open platform, the open AI platform provided by Google and Facebook, these are, they provide the codes with basic algorithms. So what the applications are doing is that based upon the codes, they have not only the codes, but also the computation power. So based on the codes provided by the platform, the very simple application is going to use the ready package and feed data. And then using the package to train the data. So that's the so-called machine learning. More sophisticated applications are going to be writing codes based upon the existing package to fit for your purpose, and then you feed the data. So the more sophisticated machine learning approach. If there is this kind of things have not been impacted by the trade war yet. If there was, then the impact is going to be immediate and huge, really huge. And so then eventually the Chinese researchers, if there is a total embargo, just like in the Cold War, if there was a total embargo, if all the Chinese researchers, not only Huawei, all the researchers have to be forced to use their domestic versions, then China has this Tencent and Baidu open platforms. Those are less good as the platforms provided by Google.
Okay. And the second part of the question, which was about the firewall and how companies operate using AI in China, but I'd broaden that out to say data nationalism generally, which is an issue, an increasingly tricky political one to navigate for companies. Mark?
Yes, I mean, I think that touches upon some of the issues that we've previously looked at with Asia House around economic nationalism and data nationalism and how that's affecting companies. And I think there's no getting away from the fact that it does create barriers to trade. A lot of the business models that we're looking at around AI, they rely on the free flow of data. And of course, if you have national barriers, that does create a challenge. However, having said that, I think that in the case of China, a lot of those challenges are mitigated by the fact that it is such a huge market. You're talking about 1.3 billion people, I think something like a quarter of the world's global data is within China. There are platforms that are there already, perhaps still aspiring to the US sort of standards, but there is an established infrastructure there. And I think actually for most companies operating in China and indeed other markets, they do need to try and be part of the local ecosystem. They need to try and work with that, work with the grain of the ecosystem. So yes, it does create challenges, but perhaps these challenges are surmountable in China.
Okay. Next question, please.
Yeah, hi, this is Rosalie from Moody's, and I think over the years we've noticed the time it takes to apply innovation has reduced, compared with the Industrial Revolution. So I was wondering, do you think now with AI technology, how the years it takes to apply in the sectors has been reduced significantly? And what are the barriers you see across sectors? In a way, which sectors you think are in a better position to apply, as Professor Xu mentioned, the connectivity, and what are the other barriers you see?
So what are the sectors most likely to benefit rapidly from AI, and what are the barriers to those others?
Thank you.
Paul, start with you.
I think any sectors which have, inevitably huge amounts of either complexity or data to navigate, are ripe for applying these kind of technologies because, humans are not particularly good at doing that. And so, for example, we were talking about estimating earlier, using machine learning to help, understand, big construction projects, which one very exciting startup is looking at the moment, ingesting, hundreds of thousands of lines from Gantt charts. That's a fantastic use of machine learning. If you can take in all that data and learn, about how long it's going to take you to do each part, of a construction project, whether that be HS2 or whether that be, a huge building, and de-risk it by doing that kind of peer review at scale in a way that humans, can't do because it's just too big, or they're going to miss things. I think those kind of things, are great examples, and I think we've talked about medical already, and all these kinds of applications where you've got enormous amounts of data and where, missing something, can have disastrous implications, whether that be a cancer tumor, or whether that be, getting something wrong in a big plan, and then the delays and repercussions of that.
Biggest industries that you see very quickly grasping these opportunities.
Okay, so in terms of timing, I want to say that each technological revolution, whether you go back to the Iron Age and Stone Age and steam engine, etc., we have had an acceleration of the speeds, and that's happening again. And now the speed is getting very, very fast. So even when I go back and look at old presentations 5-8 years ago, I have to change the dates for when things are happening because things are accelerating so fast. The sectors which I think which are benefiting and transforming first the most from artificial intelligence, that's anything to do with office work and anything you do in an office. And 75% of people go into work in an office. And that's really where the office is going to be automated, and that's where the jobs are going to be either not lasting or completely transforming. So whether it's finance, insurance, or real estate you have to do in an office, or whether it is you're sitting at the doctor's or whatever you're doing, anything to do with logistics or office work is going to be transformed. That also means that in many cases, it is compared to previous revolutions like agriculture, etc., it has been low-paid jobs that disappear. Now it is knowledge-intensive jobs that disappears, high-paid jobs, and quite high-paid in finance, in legal work, in accountancy, etc. So these are jobs, and that's where the big fuss is right now, because the people who go out of the jobs are those who spend many, many years doing an education.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the speeds, and I think that's partly driven by the nature of AI technologies, because the key difference with AI technologies compared with every technology we've had in the past is that those technologies are self-learning. So before it took time to improve the steam engine, during the Industrial Revolution, 60 years or whatever to get to commercialization. But we don't have that so much with AI because the algorithms are getting better all of the time. In terms of applications, I think I agree. I think any area where you've got complexity, and actually I do see a lot of applications of AI as a kind of a new type of innovation, a new driver of innovation. If you look at something like pharmaceutical research, we've now got algorithms that can analyze DNA and identify the genetic markers for different diseases, based on millions of data points. As Paul said, no human could do that. Take an area like financial services, where for the consumer, there's still massive complexity in choosing the right products. You could see in the future, I might have an algorithm to actually help me make my financial choices. So I think anywhere where you've got complexity, AI will be a big driver of growth.
Professor, are there any industries that I know your research didn't focus on industry specific, or they did focus on different types of AI technology, but do you have a view on what industries might benefit most very quickly?
Right. Basically, you need the precondition for applying AI is digitization. So in any industry, any sector, as long as you already have the digitization, then you are almost ready to go. And for the industries where digitization is not there yet, then if it's easy to digitize, then it's also easy to apply AI.
Okay, next question, please, sir.
Good morning, Trevor Sesford from Bank of China International. Thank you all. I've got an observation thought, then a question. The observation thought was traditionally, economically, you had specialist centers for production of certain different types of things, whether it's industry, pipe making, whatever. They all clustered together for a certain specialism and expertise. Listening here, it seems that each country perhaps almost has its own AI expertise. Going back to the old days, it was recognized that each area had that expertise, and others would know where to go for that expertise. Do you think that trend would happen with AI, or perhaps would India, China, US cover all bases?
Okay, let me start with you. We touched on that, I think, a few times. You're UK apparently trying to do everything, AI, or China specialist, or exceeding in some particular areas. Do you see countries becoming specialists or regions becoming specialists in types of AI, or the big players going right across the suite?
I guess for the large countries like China, US, the UK, I don't see a trend of specialization because it's not possible. But of course, for the nations which are leading in AI development and applications, they have to have expertise there. But overall, if we are talking about the national economy, I don't see a trend of specialization.
Paul, do you see any trends of specialization by country, by geography?
Not particularly.
Yeah.
I mean, I was struck by what you obviously, China, from your graph, has achieved, a much stronger lead on, image recognition,
Yes.
and so I mean, there may be things like that, but no, I'm afraid I don't really have a view. I think in a sense it's a very leveling technology, as in I don't see any real reasons why there would be geographical advantages. I think there could be problems or types of problems in given countries which might lend you to focus on using AI to solve those, and that might lead those specializations. So, for example, if dealing with climate change or forecasting weather
Yes.
was a particular issue, that might lead you to some expertise in that area.
Right. So almost market demands, you were saying, what the market demands.
Yeah, because what I would say, there might not be a specialization per se, but when it comes to the strategies for building growth hubs, we have outlined very different strategies, which I mentioned before, how some focus is very at the engine, very much on the research part of it, and be kind of there's a strong links to universities, and other is straight into application, or straight into supplier networks, or straight into thinking the government is a driver, so GovTech is what it is. And they're building tons of accelerators in these areas. So I would say that there's definitely different growth strategies. Yeah. Also, when you go into countries, you have different growth hubs. So you go to Hangzhou, and I was there 3 weeks ago, and they have the whole area of cloud technology, and you go to another, and this is like major companies, Alibaba, but not only, many companies, many accelerators. And then you have and then you go to the biomedical zone, and they've got tons of activities there, both the tech giants and smaller countries. And we have tried to do a little bit the same in the UK on the catapult system, where they have different areas, whether it's offshore energy or whether it's digital economy. So I do think that we try to also to have some kind of specialization, which is of course related to, as we just heard, related to what are the local needs for these technologies.
The market drivers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's too early to see trends in specialization. I mean, I suppose my hunch would be that probably only a few countries will end up being, if you like, kind of full spectrum kind of AI developers. But what I do think is important is that the countries think a bit about what they're good at. Yeah. What is their comparative advantage, and what are the social problems they're trying to solve. So if you're a manufacturing economy, you want to think, okay, how does this help us move towards high-value manufacturing? If you're an economy that, say, has lots of young workers, maybe 40% unemployment, you probably don't want to rush straight for automation. Yeah. So trying to kind of think about, okay, how do we make AI fit with where we want to be competitively as a country in the future?
Okay, we've got time for one more question for the audience.
Hi, Ben Cumming from Chatham House. I feel like in these conversations a lot, when we talk about how to capture the productivity and social benefits of artificial intelligence, it often comes back to developing that reskilling and adaptive education capacity that I think you mentioned earlier, Mark, and I think has come up a couple of times. But given how looming the problem of inequality is, both in the West, but especially in China right now, and the potential of AI and sort of concentrated technological investment to exacerbate that inequality, I was wondering if the panel had any practical steps and suggestions for policymakers about how to mitigate those risks, rather than just obviously saying we need to have a responsive and adaptive education system.
Okay, policymaker, what should they be doing given the potential or the risk that AI might in fact increase the inequality divide?
Right. This is one of the biggest challenges that AI, the development of AI is facing in all the nations. So that should eventually be related to the whole new set of laws and institutional adaptations to make sure that the workers being displaced by the new technology should have good opportunities in further developments. But in the case of China, the biggest challenges that I am seeing is how the new laws can be developed, given the existing institution in China. Actually, it's a huge challenge to the Chinese, not only the national government, but also the local governments. If we just look at today's situation, a very large number of college graduates find very difficult to find a job. So already happening. So even when the AI has not been widely applied yet, so it's a huge challenge. Yeah.
So does this come down to education, do you think? You mentioned that earlier.
It's even bigger than that. So how long have you got? Right. Definitely education and lifelong learning. It's the only insurance policy we have because we can't control, how this tide comes in around the world. Balancing innovation and legislation. Data, we want our cake and eat it when it comes to data. We have to decide what we're prepared to invest in terms of data in order to get the benefits and how we balance privacy with what we will get out of putting our data into the pot in order to improve this. It's massive. We need to do things on so many fronts, I think, to prepare for this future. But I think it's an incredibly exciting future. I don't think it's one that we should be resisting. I think it's one that we should be embracing, with all hands, because I suppose fundamentally I feel passionately that we've created a mass of very big problems for ourselves as a species, and I think this is one of the technologies that can get us out of the rabbit hole if we use it well.
So very positive there. But
yeah, so just to add, and not repeat, but to add to these points, I think that what policy can focus on very much is both the digital and the physical infrastructure investment to make sure that everybody got access to these new technologies at a high speed, low cost. Very important. That's every street, every region, every house. That investment is so crucial here to avoid inequality. The other thing I think is very important is to go back to look at the tech giants. I'm not going to repeat, but they are very, very big. They are bigger than countries. And when they tokenize, the exchange rates is more important than exchange rates of countries. So it becomes, so all of a sudden they need a lot more corporate social responsibility, and we need governance and policy making that's actually part of giving the corporate social responsibility. And the last thing about data I want to say is that the data governance is totally, in my view, misunderstood. Because when we are opting in to share our data, we do it with WhatsApp, we do it with Facebook, and the next time I accept that cookie for LinkedIn, and then I accept that cookie for that new website I'm trying to open, so then I share this and I accept another cookie, so I keep sharing my data with different organizations. But actually, I just want to get to the services and get best services. So when I share my data with Facebook or with Oracle or Ocado or whatever, Accenture, when I share the data, I don't particularly, I'm in love with the company, but I want the innovations. So I think we need to create Creative Commons. So when I share my data with Facebook, I put them into a Creative Commons pool of which Facebook can use. But again, I'm already happy to share the data. Other companies can use it too to create better services. And then we get competition. And that's the only way to get competition. This is to create Creative Commons pool of data on the right governance. Otherwise, we create these massive tech giants with the massive analytics in which they create these kind of one winner takes all scenarios. So we need to get around this, that actually it's not my data, it's our data. And when I share with one company, I might as well share with the pool. And that's the only way we can drive competition. And that's the way in which we can get innovation, entrepreneurship, and we can have much better services, and we can actually solve one of the problems with inequality. So policy is misunderstood now. They all go around the GDPR, thinking that's the future. That might have some aspects, but it's certainly not the way we should govern data in the long run.
Okay, for you it's data policy, but Mark, final word to you. What policy should government administration be looking at to try to ensure that AI doesn't increase the inequality gap?
I think above all else, I mean, there are obviously lots of factors. Above all else, I think the workforce questions are critical. We talk about reskilling people for a world of AI, but it's not really clear what reskilling actually means, because what are we reskilling people to do in the future in that world of machines? And I don't fully know the answer. I mean, I think that there are lots of factors, but I suspect that we'll have to think very carefully about the kinds of skills that we're developing in people. And my suspicion is it'll be much more about how do we inculcate creativity and empathy and those types of skills. So it might not just be about giving people great sort of technical skills, or just focusing on STEM skills as we have tended to do in the past, but thinking about the broader curriculum. And are we generating a cohort of workers who are creative, who can adapt to whatever the AI world puts in their way.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. My thanks to Mark Purdy, to Birgitte Andersen, to Paul Clarke, and a special thanks to Professor Cheung.